Hello and welcome to the Cosplayer Seamstress. I'm Micah and today we're going to be learning the basics of reading patterns. But before that, remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel. The first thing you will see when purchasing a pattern is the front of the packet. The front of a pattern is very useful for learning some things about that pattern. First, most patterns will have an example of what at least one of the patterns should look like at the end. Then, it will have other examples of pattern designs that are in the packet. The other thing that the front of the pattern will have is the size of the patterns. For example, on this one, it is size 14 through 22. Others will have a pattern size of extra small to extra large, like this one. And others will be a simple one size fits most, like this one. The back of the pattern packet has some of the most important information. Before you purchase a packet, however, be sure you know your personal measurements so that you buy the right size pattern. If you do not know how to find your personal measurements, check out my measurement video from last week. The first thing that most patterns will have at the very top is how many pieces the pattern has. For example, this skirt pattern has 5 pieces. The next thing will be the kinds of fabrics that you can use on that project. For example, on this cloak pattern, you can have crepe leather-like, gabardine, linen types, microswede, tweed, and velvet. Now, most patterns, this will be all of the information, unless it needs additional fabrics, such as A, B, and C on this cloak pattern. This one will need fur-like fabrics. The next thing will be notations. These can be different depending on the pattern designs within the packet. For example, this leotard pattern, all of the pattern designs needs thread and 3 small snaps, but A, B, C, and D need 1 7/8 yard of a 1/4 inch wide elastic. D and E need 1 9-inch invisible zipper, and E needs 3 1/4 yard of a 1/4 inch wide elastic. The next part will be different depending on the patterns, as the next part is body measurements. On a pattern that is a one size fits most, like this cloak, it will go immediately into the different designs that are in the packet. It will not have any kind of measurements. Some, like this skirt pattern, will put the measurements inside on the flap. But most will be like this leotard pattern, where the measurements will come directly after the notations. These measurements help you determine what size pattern you need to make. For example, if your bust is 36 inches to 38 inches, your waist 28 to 30, your hip 38 to 40, you are most likely a medium. The only difference that this pattern has to others is that this one requires a back, neck to waist measurement, so make sure that you have that as well. After this, the body measurements and the sizes, comes the list of all the different designs in the pattern. Right below it is this 60 inches. This is the size of the bolt. A bolt is what you'll find at a fabric store. It is a roll of fabric around a cardboard center. After this, it will have in yardage the sizes that you will need, or the amount of fabric you will need for that pattern. For example, if you are making bodysuit A and are a medium, you will need 1.5 yards of fabric. You will also need 3/8 yard for the crotch lining. On most patterns that are different measures, you will have a finished garment measurements. This is what the final product will be as far as measurements go. For this one, if you're making a medium, your bust will be 33 inches. And then on the other side here, we'll have all of the information that's over here, but in Spanish. Once you've opened your pattern packet, you should have an instruction page that looks similar to this. The first panel will be a different view of all of the different pattern designs in the packet, front and back. The next will be a list of all of the different pattern pieces that are numbered. And it includes what you will need for each pattern design. For example, if you are making pattern A, you will need piece 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. The next panel is general directions. The first section under the general directions is the patterns. First, you have your symbols. This means grain line, which means you need to put it straight on the grain of the fabric. This is placed on a solid line, for example, the fold of a fabric. This is the center, front, or back of the garment. These are notches. When you come across these, you will need to cut in the opposite direction, creating a triangle with the pattern. These are dots. These you'll mark with a pin or a fabric-safe pencil. This is the cutting line. This is where you'll want to cut. And this is a lengthen or shorten line if you need to do that. Below that, you have your seam allowance, which is 5/8 unless otherwise noted. And on multi-size patterns, you want to mark on the fabric with a pin, fabric-safe pin, where your pattern is. Then you have the information to adjust as needed. To lengthen, it says to cut between those two lines, put a piece of paper, tape in place, and now you've lengthened the pattern. To shorten, you'll fold it to where you want it to be and tape it in place. Next, you have your cutting information. Before cutting, make sure to press the fabric and do a pre-shrink on the fabric because you don't want it to shrink after you've made it. Next, they recommend circling your cutting layout, which I will show you in a minute, pinning the pattern to the fabric, and includes information on double thickness and single thickness, and for one-way fabrics or pattern fabrics. It also has information about after cutting it. So make sure that you transfer all your markings to the wrong side of the fabric. You don't want your pins or fabric safe anything to be on anything that is going to be viewable to everyone once you finish making your pattern. The next thing in here is your sewing. Your general directions are to sew it according to the sewing directions, which I'll show you in a minute, to pin it, the fabric, and match up the notches, which we talked about earlier. Your stitch size, which is 5/8 seam allowance unless otherwise. Press open all of your seams so that everything lies flat, and trim according to these designs here. The next thing that you will see is your cutting layouts. So if you're making bodysuit A, according to the general directions, you will want to circle this. It also includes a key for which side of the fabric it's supposed to be laid on. If you flip the page over, you will have the sewing directions on it. First is some more basic general directions. For example, here it tells you to go read the general directions on page 1. Next, you have your fabric key. This tells you the right side, the wrong side, interfacing, and lining. These will be used throughout the pattern and the sewing directions to tell you which way the fabric is supposed to be going or how they're supposed to be facing each other. Next, it will have tips and tricks on how to sew activewear and knit fabric for this particular pattern. So just some methods for how to do all of that, including how to do your seams and your elastic application. Next is how to do serging or overlocking, including the type of thread you should use, the type of needle you should use, your seams, and elastic application. Next it will have the specific directions for each of the different pattern designs. For example, this is the beginning of bodysuit A, and it continues here and then on to the next page. Next, I want to show you some examples of what the different symbols look like on the pattern itself. Here's an example of the grain line. This is when you place the fabric along the grain. Over here is an example of a cut on the fold line. So you'll put this line along the fold of the fabric. Next, your notches. So when you come across a notch like this, you'll cut out and create a triangle or like a diamond so that it matches up. The notches are useful for matching up your fabric later so that everything is aligned. This is an example of that shorten or lengthen line. So if you were to shorten it, you would fold it along this line here and fold it up to where you want it. And then to lengthen it, you'd cut in between these two lines and place that paper in between. These are cut lines here. So you'll cut this fabric here if you are an extra small. Finally, you have your dots here. This is one of those places where you put a pin or put a fabric safe pencil or marker. If you're not quite sure what all of this looks like or what it will look like with fabric, check out my video, Little Red Riding Hood Costume Part 1, which will be coming out in 2 weeks. Now that you know the basics of reading patterns, you are ready to start making costumes and designs. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. See you on the next project.